Bayonetta 2. For a good amount of time, this was my favorite game of all time. In the first Bayonetta game video, I told the story of how I got introduced to the franchise, noting that I started with the second game and not the first. If you haven't seen the video, I highly recommend going and watching that, though just as a quick refresher, I got introduced to the game from a friend at school, my parents got me the game, and playing it on the Wii U mixed with the hype surrounding Bayonetta coming to Smash really got me hooked onto the franchise. While I do prefer the first game, I still love the second all the same, and in my eyes is what I'd consider to be the perfect sequel. Sequels are pretty hard to do all across the board. When you have the first installment so good, expectations are incredibly high to follow, and oftentimes in media, they fail. However, with Bayonetta 2, they nailed it out of the park. It didn't come without its challenges though, as this game is kind of a miracle baby. Bayonetta 2 was a game in limbo for a minute. Following the first game's release, Sega thought that the sales were just okay, though they were still willing to fund for a sequel. Platinum got to work at making the game's sequel, and things were going pretty well. Though there's no evidence out there for how much progress was made, you'd have to imagine there was a good amount given the time period. Then we get to 2012. This was a roller coaster year for Bayonetta 2. The game was being developed and things had appeared to have been going pretty well. The one thing I was able to find out about the game was a rumor of one of the main characters being a member of the US military, but there isn't much confirmation beyond it being just a rumor. As for Sega around this time, they were going through an internal reshuffle and the beginning of a downward spiral. While the previous year's release of Sonic Generation and the greatest Wii game ever, Mario and Sonic at the London 2012 Olympic Games, that's a long fucking title, proved to be a success, Sega also put too much dip on their ship. The higher-ups wanted to put a focus on Sega's popular franchises, namely Sonic, which meant new titles like Bayonetta or even just new franchises period weren't at the interest of Sega. This in hindsight would prove to backfire on them for a couple of years, as the next few major releases for Sega included Sonic Lost World and Sonic Boom Rise of Lyric. It sounds like I'm shitting on Sonic, I promise I love Sonic, but I mean like, come on man. Anyway, so as a result of the shift, Sega made the decision to shelve Bayonetta 2, leaving the status of the game in limbo. Platinum Games was starting to believe the game would never come to light, but just when hope was seemingly lost, they were approached by a company willing to finish funding for the game and finally have it come out. What wasn't expected was which company would be the one to approach Platinum Games and Sega. It was none other than Nintendo. This does relate to the topic, but I need to go on a little side rant right quick. I hate Nintendo YouTubers. Every Nintendo YouTuber has made the exact same video of why did the Wii U fail, was the Wii U a bad console, why I bought a Wii U, and blah blah blah, and they all have the exact same shit in them. They go over the history of the console, talk about how it failed because of marketing or the strategies, but I mean hey, the games were good, and if you like to mod, it's a good console for that. I love the Wii U even though it's shit. It's all the exact same thing, and I'm very tired of it. If you look up 3 Wii U videos from different YouTubers, it's all gonna be the same shit, I promise. Anyways, I went on this rant to say that it's been covered so much to a point that Nintendo during this time wasn't doing too hot. I don't want to cover their struggles, as that was kind of what that rant was for, but rather to mention how truly crazy it was that Bayonetta of all games was brought onto the family-friendly company's hardware, and being an exclusive at that. When looking at this in 2024, it's maybe not so shocking with the Nintendo that we have nowadays, but this is from the viewpoint of someone in 2012. Imagine little me with my 3DS playing New Super Mario Bros. 2 and Pokemon X and Y. Never could you have imagined that kid being shown a game like Bayonetta existing in the same company. But they wanted it, enough to let Platinum have mostly free reign over what to do with Bayonetta 2. They didn't want them to tone down any of what had made Bayonetta Bayonetta. In fact, they encouraged it. Everyone who worked on the game has glowing things to say about Nintendo and their involvement. Nobody truly knows why Nintendo went and got the game. It could have been an attempt to capture a more mature audience for the Wii U, maybe it was a vision for the future of Nintendo, maybe even a chance to lil bro Sega once again, though I think it was definitely a mix of all those points. Regardless, on the September 13th, 2012 Nintendo Direct, it was revealed that in addition to Wonderful 101 coming to the Wii U, Bayonetta 2 would also come as a console exclusive. People online were shocked, even with Satoru Shibata in the presentation being like, yeah, you really aren't gonna expect this. Fans were skeptical of this partnership though, wondering if because it was Nintendo funding that they would greatly tone down the game in addition to there being a fear of it releasing on the Wii U, which even that early on wasn't doing too hot. Though as we'd later find out from more trailers over time, and from multiple developer interviews in the future, this wouldn't be an issue. Sega would also be a consultant for the game, though that was expected given their franchise is in part theirs. There would be a couple more Bayonetta 2 reveals throughout the next year, with a few more appearances in Nintendo Directs and a playable demo at E3 2013 and 14, as well as an announcement that the first game would be coming to the Wii U alongside the second game's physical release, while a digital release would come on the eShop. They also did some marketing for the game as well, hiring Playboy model Pamela Horton to cosplay the character, which looking back on it, even with the Nintendo we have today, it was still a you had to be there kind of moment. But anyways, after all this long development time, the Miracle game would finally release in Japan on September 20th, 2014, and in October 2014 for the rest of the world to glowing reviews. Platinum and Nintendo definitely shut up any doubters with this game. It got numerous great reviews from critics and fans alike. It got a 91 out of 100 on Metacritic, a 38 out of 40 on Famitsu, 10 out of 10 on GameSpot, 9.5 out of 10 on IGN. I can go on and on. I'm not a big review guy for judging new games, but it was refreshing to see so many people enjoy the game. This game proved to be a massive success to fans, though sales-wise it didn't appear to do much. This didn't really bother Nintendo much at all, as they not only bring the game over to the next console, the Nintendo Switch, but also help produce a third game, being Bayonetta 3. We'll get there real fucking soon, don't worry. Over time, these proved to be worthwhile investments, as both games have sold over 1 million copies each on the Switch. So that's just a history of the game. I wanted to share the game's development as a part of this video, as I felt it was not only important to further emphasize how good this game is given its circumstances, but to also highlight it as a comparison for the third game's development. As for me, while I already went over my experience with the game in that first video, I'll reiterate how much I enjoyed it back then. It was unlike anything I had ever played prior and grew into my favorite game of all time back in that time. As I've gotten older and the more games I played with sequels, it still remains the game as my benchmark for what a great sequel is. Even releasing 10 years ago, it remains just as much of a classic and a perfect sequel nowadays as it did a decade ago. But now the question becomes why? Why do I deem this game to be the perfect sequel, and what qualities does it possess to make it the perfect sequel? That's what I wanted to talk about in today's video. Like the previous video, I'll go over these points and qualities as well as my personal experiences with them. Also, like the first video, I feel it's best to start off with the game's story. So, here is the story of Bayonetta 2. In Bayonetta 2, you follow Bayonetta, who could have guessed, a few months after the events of the first game. Her and the returning Enzo are out shopping in New York City during Christmas Eve when a group of angels attack the city. Her and the returning Jean team up to take down the angels on top of a jet, with Rodin also returning to supply Bayonetta with new guns. As Bayonetta summons a demon to finish off the angels, it backfires and the demon turns to attacking Bayonetta and Jean. Jean saves Bayonetta, but at the cost of the attack taking Jean's soul instead. Going to the gates of hell, Rodin informs Bayonetta that Jean's soul is on a timer, and being unable to save her within that time frame will cause her soul to forever belong to Inferno. Though as the game is set up in chapters, there isn't technically a timer aside from in-game cutscenes. He expresses his doubt with her in doing this, as it's a dangerous act, though presents Bayonetta with Jean's Umbran Watch, which will be reunited with the body in order for Jean to be saved, as that's an Umbran Witch's eternal life. From the help of Luca, who also returns from the first game, Rodin, and Enzo, Bayonetta learns that she needs to travel to the mountain of Fimbulventor, as there's an entrance to Inferno there, where she can then save Jean. Bayonetta 2, in similar vein to the first, also has multiple plot points, though unlike the first, this game makes the plot points more known and important to the game's climax. Shortly after you defeat the demon, a cutscene plays where you're introduced to two characters, the Masked Lumen Sage and the Prophet. The Prophet brings the Lumen Sage to the current timeline and offers him a chance at revenge. Returning to Bayonetta, she is seen making her way through Noaton, which is based on Italy and Belgium, where she meets a mysterious boy named Loki, the third and probably most important new character in the game. He's able to harness magical powers in the form of tarot cards, which is his primary source of attack. He, like Bayonetta, needs to reach Fimbulventor, though for a different reason than Bayonetta. They strike an agreement to both go to the mountain together, using each other's strengths and knowledge to arrive. Loki, however, similar to Bayonetta in the first game, suffers from memory loss and isn't quite sure of his motivation to head to the top of the mountain, beyond feeling a desire to need to go there. You do learn about tidbits of Loki's past and memories throughout the journey to the top, but it's not long before you get attacked by enemies. Not just things like angels and newly introduced demon enemies, but there's also multiple encounters with the Lumen Sage. As the duo reach the gate entrance to Inferno, they're stopped by the Masked Lumen and the Prophet, now given the name Lopter, via projection, where they attack Bayonetta and Loki before encouraging Bayonetta to see with her left eye of the world, showing her a vision via the Remembrance of Time. The Remembrance of Time from this point on plays an important role in the game's story. The remembrances of time are occurrences that allow for one to see moments of the past as they truly happened, untainted by history. Certain people can have these visions, most determined by their angelic or demonic spirit, or by being holders of the eyes of the world. This concept was originally created by Aesir, the god of chaos, feeling that existence should be preserved despite time constantly moving forward. He created them from his observations of human life, which he saw in the Garden of God, an area nearby Noaton and underneath the mountain of Fimbulventor. though created so much that he'd begin losing track of them. There are two people who can control the remembrance of time, Loki and Lopter, as the game later reveals to be the two beings that make up Aesir. Lopter does have more control over the remembrance than Loki, as he was granted the prophetic power, which allows free control over the remembrance, as Loki was given power to manipulate environments. As both Lopter and Bayonetta can access the remembrance of time due to her holding the Eye of the World, he shows Bayonetta a vision of her father, Balder, actually attempting to save her mother Rosa from the witch hunts, and that the person responsible for Rosa's death is a figure with similar looks to Loki. Lopter attempts to manipulate Bayonetta into believing that that's the truth as it happened, though is stopped by Loki as he throws a card into the gate, opening the entrance and drags Bayonetta with him into Inferno. It's here that she realizes her time to save Jean is running out and makes her way to the depths of Inferno to save Jean, which she does so with an assist from Rodan. On the way back, she encounters Loki and the Lumen Sage in a battle where his mask is shed, revealing himself as a younger version of Balder. Just as Balder is about to win, Loki releases a shockwave, trapping both Bayonetta and Balder inside of it. The blast caused the two to be brought back 500 years into the past to Vigor during the witch hunts, where Bayonetta sees an alive Rosa. They team up for a brief period of time before they encounter a younger version of Lopter, who is a doppelganger of Loki and the one present in the previous vision of the remembrance of time. It's also here that Bayonetta and Balder see Lopter was the true killer of Rosa, not Loki, though was fooled into believing it as they look similar. Back to the present day, Loki manages to escape Inferno where he meets with Luca once more, asking him to take them to the top of the mountain, as he now remembers who he is and his purpose is to stop the evil, being Lopter, which Luca agrees before the duo is stopped by Lopter and captured. Back in the present day, thanks to an assist from Jean, Bayonetta and Balder arrive to the top of Fimbulventor where they encounter Lopter, who has Loki held hostage. It's here where they fully revealed that he and Loki make up Aesir, and were split up into two, one being good represented by Loki, and evil being represented by Lopter, which is the result of creating the Eyes of the World to maintain balance. Loki was given the power to control the eyes as fit, while Lopter was given the power to oversee history. Feeling that he was losing his power, Lopter decided to take the eyes back for his own use 500 years in the past, and regain Aesir's power to rule over the realm. Loki had escaped to the future by realizing Lopter would need his power, and had subsequently lost his memory in the process. Lopter would need to wait to find Loki again in order to gain the power to take the eyes, and decided to bring the younger Balder in the present because his older self had died along with the right eye after Bayonetta defeated Jublius. Before he could act on being used by Lopter, he takes the right eye from Balder, officially forming himself and Loki into Aesir, the god of chaos once again. This time with both eyes of the world intact after a short battle with Bayonetta. As Aesir fights with Bayonetta and Balder, Loki realizes his other hidden ability which he can use to lessen Lopter. Loki claims the power Lopter holds is over nothingness and the ability to erase anything from the world, which he uses to erase the eyes of the world, causing Aesir to be weakened. This allows Bayonetta and Balder to summon a hybrid of Jublius and Sheba to kick Lopter into the ocean, where Jean's summoned Gamora finishes off the body. As Lopter's soul attempts to escape, Balder intervenes and absorbs the soul, despite Loki's warning that Lopter will corrupt him forever, though Balder is content with the choice as it shows human free will. Before he goes back in time, he tells Bayonetta he knew she was Cereza all along, and asks her that in the event Lopter corrupts him, she will be the one to prevent his actions from spiraling out of control, to which she agrees and calls him dad before leaving. As for Loki, he was able to destroy the eyes and restore balance to the world, so he begins to fade away. Bayonetta asks him if they'll meet again, which he says they might after he is reborn from his break. Several days pass after the events at Fimbulventor, where Bayonetta and Jean are back in the city looking to shop for post-holiday deals, where a mother and child and a stroller go past the two. Out of the stroller, a tarot card of Loki's, being the Fool, falls out of the stroller and appears face up to Bayonetta, signaling that his return is coming sooner than originally thought. Enzo too returns, attempting to run away from the angels, which ruins another dress of Bayonetta's as a result. Annoyed, her and Jean team up to fight angels as the game goes to the credits. One final part to the story, there's a post-game credit scene showing Balder returning to the past. A symbol on his forehead reveals Lopter is taking control, and he puts on the signature Father Balder mask from the first game, revealing and setting up the events of the first game. And there's the story of Bayonetta 2. I think it's an amazing follow-up to the first game, as it provides not only further expansion to the characters previously, but also introduces new characters that all make sense and feel like they belong. It does truly feel like the main characters develop as people, with Bayonetta and Loki being two perfect examples. Their relationship with each other at the start to the end of the game is really special. At the start, Loki is very arrogant and, well, a fool, while Bayonetta starts off as her usual over-the-top self, but towards the end of the game, the two grow a real bond with one another, with Loki being more understanding and respectful, while Bayonetta becomes loving and caring. It was also a much-needed improvement to have a second major storyline that also flowed well with the other. While I do enjoy the first game's story, there are too many plot points that mostly feel insignificant to the main plot, As with this game, there's only really two major plot points, saving Jean and the story with Loki Lopter and the Masked Sage, yet they both interact with each other due to the location of the mountain holding what is needed for both plot points. As far as story goes, this game does a really nice job at creating a captivating story that, while it doesn't need knowledge of the first game to enjoy, is further enhanced by having played the first. When I first played, I wasn't ever confused by the characters or the story due to how the story has a plot point with new characters in addition to the one with Jean. It also does a good job at explaining that Jean is Bayonetta's friend, so it is definitely first timer friendly regardless of which story you enjoy more. Overall, Bayonetta 2's story is a well organized and enjoyable story, and I'd have to say I'd probably enjoy 2's story at a surface level more. When it comes to the gameplay of the first Bayonetta, the base level is about the same, though more refined. Platinum games are notorious for their well put together, clean gameplay across all of their titles. The first Bayonetta, even still to this day, holds up as well and is a true test to game design and player skill. Bayonetta 2 lines up perfectly with Platinum's goal at unique, innovative gameplay. While I mentioned that the surface level of the gameplay is the same, there is a new mechanic that the gameplay is centered around, the Umbran Climax. The Umbran Climax is a supercharged period of time in which your attacks are stronger and extend the length of the battlefield. It's signaled by a gauge towards the top left of the screen, which can be upgraded to increase over time by collecting moon pearls throughout the game. If you played the first game, this may be somewhat similar to Serious Mode, a technique where Bayonetta would also gain a stronger attack. But if you also played the first Bayonetta, you probably completely forgot about that like I did. Serious Mode was only used at certain points in the first game and only in a few chapters. As with Umbran Climax, it's used anytime as long as your gauge is charged up, which can happen multiple times a chapter. That being said, Umbran Climax does make the game a bit easier than the first, though it's a welcome change that is also entirely optional. If you compare the usage of Serious Mode in the first game, it's almost entirely non-existent. So I for one welcome a mechanic more used visually, plus the attacks are pretty. In addition to the new gameplay mechanic, there's also a new multiplayer mode, Tag Climax. In this mode, you can play as Bayonetta, Jean, Rodin, Rosa, or Balder and fight against angels and demons from the story mode with a partner. This can be a friend online or locally, a random person online, or a CPU partner. Players will battle through 6 chosen verses or battles, with each verse card holding specific waves of enemies depending on what card was chosen. During the battles, players will share a HUD housing things like their health, while also sharing things like which time during the fights instead of being limited to one person. When the meter in the middle is full, Umbran Climax is automatically triggered for both players, though it can also be triggered independently depending on magic. If a player is downed, they will have a limited amount of time they can be revived, otherwise the verse is over and will need to be restarted. You can also wager halos on who will perform better, which is amazing for me as a real gambler. The mode itself is a pretty fun side tangent from the main story and is one of the more underrated parts of Bayonetta not a lot of people talk about. Now for me personally, I have only very limited experience with the Tag Climax, as a maximum of 5 people have ever actually tried the mode. Nobody is really playing it, nor have I met anyone who really has, so the option for a CPU is very welcome and something I leaned heavily on back when I played it. The boss battles too are something I'd like to highlight, and they're even better in this game than the first. The first boss you face, Belief, is in the opening chapter and it takes place on a broken railroad falling from the sky. Then in that same chapter you fight Gamora on the side of a building in New York. It's crazy. They went all in with the set pieces in this game and making each fight feel grand. Like I did in the last video, I wanted to highlight a few boss battles in the game that stood out as my favorites. The first is the second fight with Glamour, where you're in this whirlpool of water, making it a fantastic scene. The second is the first fight with the Masked Sage. While there's other fights with him in the game, I always really liked the night sky and the city in the background for this one. Then the last fight I wanted to highlight was the final boss, Aesir. Fun fact, this was the very first game I remember raging at, and it was because of this boss, so that's fun. But I just always had a hard time with it when I was younger, but it had really good satisfaction when I beat it. Additionally, I should mention that with this being the sequel, the overall gameplay is cleaned up as well from the first game. Things like frame rates and graphics get better overall with better hardware, but combat as a whole feels more fluid and less tight than it did in the first game. They also removed things like insta-death quicktime events and elongated gimmick sections such as the bike riding chapter, though that's my favorite chapter in the game. So, design. Design was the last thing I wanted to mention. As much as I love the first Bayonetta and still do prefer it to the sequel, it's not perfect by any stretch, and there are some things I don't like. The biggest thing I don't like is the overall setting. The settings in Bayonetta are very lifeless. It's all these ugly ass green, gray, and brown colors, which isn't the most eye-catching thing out there. The game looks muddy, that's probably the best way I can describe it. It was definitely a sign of the times, as a lot of games from the 360 and PS3 era looked like this, but in a retrospect it's kinda ugly. So Bayonetta thankfully takes note of this and shows a lot more vibrant colors. Noatone is this beautiful town that already looks light years better than Vigrid in the first game. Here there's interlocking streets, better interaction with the tourists, there's a whole ass harbor, I can go on. The town has a lot of different shades of blue, while also retaining the pretty architecture of places like Venice and Florence in our world. The town shares the same name as the home of Veneer god I'm just gonna put that on screen, I don't fucking know how to say that. Which Noaton translates to the word heaven, and you definitely feel like you're there. The town resembles that of Venice in the real world, which the team actually traveled to for help designing the game. If you're a fan of more darker tones while still keeping the vibrancy, the Runes of Lost Memory is a great set as well. It has this really cool triangle as the main set piece, which would be the sealed gates. The sky below is this beautiful purple shade, while above it is a deeper blue. On the other side of things, the enemies in the first games was something I loved the design of, and Bayonetta 2 does a great job of building off of those with not only more angels, but introduces infernal demons to the mix too, which also look great and offers a good contrast from the angels. I too should mention that the sound design is also amazing. The OST is just as great as the first game, with this one introducing a lot more pianos and classical music, while also furthering the jazz, J-pop, among other genres from the first. So that was all a lot of information all at once, but I shared all of that first so we could get back to the question. What makes Bayonetta 2 the perfect sequel? The answer is one word: evolution. Bayonetta 2 is the perfect sequel not because it takes away from the first, but it builds off of it in a way that doesn't feel forced or just for the sake of doing something. It's an evolution of previous concepts. If we quickly look back at the previous three things I mentioned, the story, the gameplay, and the design, each one of them follows this theme of evolution when compared to the first game. The story of 2 follows up on characters like Bayonetta, Jean, and Baldur from the first, fleshing them out more and showing more personality traits, especially with Bayonetta and Baldur. The game also evolves in giving us new characters like Loki, who throughout the story you watch grow as a person and becomes a really likable character. Something Bayonetta 3 failed to do with Viola, but I'll save that for that video. The gameplay, while retaining much of what made it great in the first game, gets evolved with things like new mechanics and a cleanup of the graphics, controls, and frame rates. It never needed to change up the gameplay, it only needed to improve things that were already present. And then with design, changing up colors and locations while also offering new enemies is again a natural evolution. It took what needed improvement from the first and did it. It largely removes what wasn't working in the first title and either offers a better fix to it, or removes it entirely in favor of a new alternative. I again don't want to go into Bayonetta 3 yet, as I want to save that for its own video and I will have a lot to say then, but that's a massive area Bayonetta 3 failed in was its progression and evolution. It felt more like a step backwards instead of improving on an already great concept through things like what it introduces than what it removes. The concepts from 1 were great and all they needed was improvements and a natural evolution, which is what 2 does. In conclusion, Bayonetta 2 is a special game and a true benchmark for how to do a perfect sequel. The game had quite the story from launch to release, but it was made worthwhile with the quality of game it provided. It's always held a special place in my heart as it was what introduced me to the franchise I feel so passionate about. This was my first Bayonetta experience and I don't regret it at all. I would tell people to play the first game first as that's just logically making sense, but in a weird way I feel like 2 was the right introduction for me. I definitely don't feel like it would be that way if I had started playing nowadays, but perhaps it's just a right place, right time kind of feeling. No matter what, I'll carry this franchise and this game with me for the rest of my life. In addition to the Lover's Tarot card, I also have Loki's full tarot card connected right next to it tattooed on my arm. This was all just my thoughts on Bayonetta 2, but of course I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts as well down below. So if you have any experience with the game, I'd love to hear your stories with it as well, or if this video encouraged you to get into the franchise too, I would like to hear about that. Or even just what you thought about the video as a whole. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Goodbye.